Okay, so good morning, everybody, and welcome to session 4 of TCoffeeAndCode this week. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, thanks very much for joining us. There seems to be a lot of regular names back on from the panel here, which is great to see a lot of you joining back through. As with these sessions, please feel free to join in with the chat. We've got the chat panel open. As I say, these are live, pretty unscripted. So we'll be interacting with you as much as we can through the chat, and to give this as much of a real live event feel as we can in these times. As always, webcams are completely optional, but it is really nice to see your faces and to be able to kind of just have that bit more of a social feel around. So please feel free to join, put them on, but obviously, please be mindful that everybody around the world can see what's going on. So this is quite a different format for us. Your feedback is valuable to us to see how we kind of manage these moving forward, but also start thinking about other kind of sessions you'd like to see in the future, for maybe kind of another week of this at some point, which would be great. So today's session we are going to be talking about test-driven development, or TDD for short. And I'm delighted to be joined by Jens Fudge, who is an Embarcadero MVP and author and trainer, and runs the Danish user group, Dupug. Good morning, Jens.
Good morning, everyone. I hope that you're all fine here. Actually, it's noon here in Denmark, but I'll say good morning anyway. That's fine.
Yeah. It's still a good time for coffee, though.
This is a good time for coffee break. Every time is a good time for coffee break.
Yeah. I just had a thought back to noons when I used to be over in Denmark for a bit. And I always knew it was a good time for coffee and around lunchtime, especially if I got a bit of layer cake as well. So that was.
For everyone that doesn't know, Stephen actually lived in Denmark some years ago, and learned quite a lot of Danish. The most important word he learned was skål, which is cheers.
Yes. So Jens, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah. Well, as Stephen correctly said, my name is Jens Fudge, and I know that a lot of English people call me Jens or Jen, but it's Jens. It's pronounced with a Y because that's the way we do it here in Denmark. Anyway, I've been working with Delphi since it came out back in 1995. We've started with Delphi 1 on 16-bit Windows, so it's been quite a ride for me. And I'm at level 54 currently at the game of real life. I've got 2 kids and I've got 2 grandkids, and Stephen also told you that I'm an Embarcadero MVP, and has also asked me to join the MVP group back in 2012 or something. And I work as a trainer and as a consultant, and I'm actually having a training course next week. It should have been in Oslo, but we're doing it online. But it's for the Norwegian and Swedish company AlphaSoft. I'm doing that next week, a complete 2-day training course on test-driven development. So it was a perfect opportunity to get to this coffee break here, talking about that. Just for fun, I also work as a mental coach for elite sports people at Olympic level or even lower level. So I could even help someone who is just competing in the local club or something in most sports. But my passion is, of course, with archery. And in my spare time, I brew beer, wine, and mead. So that's a great thing. And a fun fact about my grandkids: my granddaughter helped me brew beer when she was 3, and I thought that was the perfect age to start learning to brew beer.
Yeah, and I must say that the last live event I managed to do before all the COVID stuff was actually over in Denmark, and Jens was nice enough to bring a couple of bottles along for us to have a chat with afterwards, which was very nice. Great. So today's session, as I say, is going to be about test-driven development. Please kind of get your questions into the chat and get them through. But I thought probably the easiest place to start with is is kind of defining what test-driven development is. So what is it, Jens?
Well, test-driven development is, well, I read in the book that you start by writing a test, and then you make sure that the test fails. And once you've made sure that the test that you've written failed, then you write the code that's going to check for that this test is going to check for. And that is actually the way that they advocate it in the theoretical stuff. But I'm kind of a pragmatic guy, so often I'll just skip the making sure that this test is going to fail, that I know that I did not write any code to. So I might just skip that bit. But I do really like to write tests, and I do really like to make sure that the code is working, because making the test-driven development makes it easy for me to, when I want to write a bit of code that I want done in the test-driven development way, I would of course write the test right now, make sure that the code is then working on the tests that I have written, and that will give me the opportunity to refactor it. So the test-driven development pattern is actually write a test, then write the code, make sure that tests are going through, passing, and then you can refactor the code, make it better and better and better, and keep on adding more tests if needed, but keep on also running all of the old tests that you've written to this code, so that you can make sure that your refactorings to whatever thing you're doing is working. Now, there's a small thing that I need to say about test-driven development. Strictly by the book, they say that you have to write a bunch of unit tests, and the unit in this context is not to be confused with the Delphi unit. They're two different things. The unit is defined really just as the smallest amount of code that you actually can test. And the smallest amount of code that you actually can test would probably be one method in one class. I was at the session yesterday where we had Daniel Tetti, and he was talking about using also the framework to make integration tests.
Mm-hmm.
I would do that too. I think that's a perfectly good framework to use also for integration tests and stuff. But strictly by the theoretical part of test-driven development, one unit test is supposed to be one test on one very small part of code, preferably a function or a method on a given class. So that's more or less the definition of what is test-driven development.
So I was just kind of thinking, before we kind of get further in, it would be great in the chat if anybody wants to kind of flag up that they're using unit tests in their code today, or if they're not. It'd be really interesting to kind of get a feel for that. I don't know if there's any way we can do a thumbs up or anything like that on GoToMeeting, but maybe just in the chat to go ahead and say, yeah, we're using it, or we're looking to add it in. So that's always kind of good to kind of get the feel for. A couple of questions and bits coming through already. One from Alex, which will Alexandra will pick up a little bit later.
I see that Jason Chapman is doing a surplus of unit tests. He's got 30 unit tests for 500,000 lines of code. That's brilliant. No, this is better than 10.
Yeah, and I think one of the questions we've got, or one of the things we've got on here, is about when to add them into a project and how to add them into a project. And do you have to add them in from the beginning, or is it something you can retrospectively add into projects as you're going?
Well, as I started by saying, if you go strictly by the book, it's impossible to add tests to existing code. But I would never go strictly by the book. I would add tests to existing code. Now, I've been working for various companies with big projects, like with 3 million lines of code, or it could be Jason's project with 500,000 lines of code or something like that. And if you haven't got any unit tests to it, I would definitely not ask anyone, oh, can you please do a bunch of unit tests so that we can cover all of the 3 million line of code? Because chances are within a week, he'll be running screaming from the place, and he will never come back again. So I would not do that. But what I would actually do is, okay, we have decided now to take our old legacy project that's 25 years old with 3 million lines of code, and we're going to actually do something nice to it. So we're going to add some unit tests. And I would then add unit tests whenever I'm adding some more code. So I'll just leave everything as it is, more or less. And then when I'm changing something in the code, let's say we are implementing a new feature, then I'll make sure that this new feature follows the test-driven development pattern by making it testable. So you separate your code from your forms. And I saw there was a question about MVVM in the chat. And unit testing is actually not only on MVVM, but it really, of course, does help if you can separate your code in bits and pieces. So raise of hands, everyone. How many here have, when they started Delphi programming, used to pattern on click-driven code? I have, for sure, I know. So you double-click your button and then you write your code straight there, and that's absolutely wrong. That's the worst place that you can write your code. So I would put it, you have to separate your code. So, well, as I was saying, when you add more code, when you change features, add features into your existing code base, then you should add some unit tests there. But another place that is really nice place to do it is if you have a customer or your quality assurance department or someone else finds a bug in your code and reports a bug in your code, then you should write a unit test or a integration test, unit testing framework, whatever is possible, to actually prove that this bug exists. So now you have written a test that can prove beyond any doubt that this bug exists. Then you fix the code, and now you have that unit test in your unit testing framework, even though it might strictly not be a unit test because it's more of an integration test, but you still have added this into your stuff, which will make it much easier to maintain your software so that this actual one bug stays away, because we all know that we fix a bug and then for some stupid reason 5 months later it's back again in some various different part of whatever the bug was. So I would for sure add any tests for existing bugs as they drop in, also to be able to prove to the customer and to your quality assurance that, hey, I fixed this, it works now.
Yeah, I think quite often with projects, getting a proof of concept done on a tight time frame. Some people go, well, actually doing the unit tests up front make it longer because you've got more work to do. But actually what you find is that over time that really pays back. Certainly, as you're testing the code as you develop it, as you start refactoring, adding things in, that's really when the unit tests come into their own in terms of being able to pay back. And I think it's quite right. There's taking the puristic view that, oh, you need to build everything in a way that enables unit testing to come through. In the ideal world, yeah, absolutely. But we have to live in reality as well, and the fact that we do pick up projects that have been developed, and let's bear in mind that over time development practices have modernized, they've changed, they've learned from practices that have been out there. The original development practices were an evolution from what was going in the world of manufacturing and construction, with the whole kind of waterfall approach. And as we've moved more and more towards agile and the active software development design patterns, bits that led around the original RAD patterns as well, then unit testing is something that's come in as a need based on that kind of way of working. So we are picking up and working with older code bases where unit tests haven't even been thought about at the time that code was written. And obviously for more modern day stuff, those thoughts are around, and we can deal with that. But specifically for some of the older stuff, the approach of going and being pragmatic around it and going, right, what are the critical parts here that we need to make sure work well and are tested, and picking those up rather than trying to look at everything as a whole. As you said at the beginning, Jens, if you try to rewrite the entire product to be unit testable, the business case just wouldn't stack up. It just wouldn't stack up at all. So you need to have a pragmatic view on this when you're picking these up, and the approach of tackling the new bits as they're added in and the critical elements as they're added in, and you identify those, is definitely the way to do it. And especially, I think one of the areas that we're seeing more and more around this is where people are looking at migrating code from a traditional desktop application into a multi-tier approach when they're having to look at doing some refactoring anyway, and then being able to build some tests that they can run against the methods at the start, and then once they've done the refactoring, breaking bits away, they can then check it afterwards. And I think that brings us into kind of another area of testing as well, which is where unit testing can actually be complemented by UI testing. Things like RANRX, which are part of the Architect Edition. Being able to build tests and get the end user of an established application to build a UI test that you can run and you can see things working from the UI perspective, is often a way that can complement unit testing as to get a complete coverage of the testing, and provides the user acceptance testing element, while at the same time then providing something that you can then compare your unit tests to as you add them in, to do some of that refactoring work afterwards. So that hybrid approach can also be quite a beneficial way to move bits forward.
You also triggered me there because you said that while migrating stuff, and I've been involved in a couple of projects where we're migrating old legacy Delphi projects from Delphi 2007. Of course, it has to be 2007 to something later, and we know that there are quite a few problems in that area, or there can be quite a few problems in that area. So the first thing that I recommend the customers do is actually to clean up the code as well as they can by getting rid of dead code and making sure that the functions are as well written as possible, making sure already now in their 2007 their Delphi code, making sure that strings are compatible or more or less compatible with the Unicode strings when they move on later, because we've all been using strings to store data beforehand, and when one character was 1 byte long, that was not really a problem, but it's a problem now that you have to be aware of course. And in that case, and whenever I clean up some of the code, I'm going to refactor some function. I'll make unit tests into that function first to make sure that the function before me meddling with it actually works, and then when I've meddled with it, make sure that still works, because then I've got these unit tests of all of the code that I've been cleaning up. And that actually is a very nice place to put in unit tests for existing code too.
Yeah, so just having a quick look at some of the comments in the chat here. Bruce comments that a test is the equivalent of a specification. So you write your test first, and then you're writing your spec first instead of as you go. Which has been quite a revolution for him. Another comment just came in and just pushed all the comments around on. Jason here's he has his tests wrap around some of the core utility functions that he's got that are used everywhere within the application. So he's identified the kind of the critical areas and then tested the input and the output of those, especially to make sure that everything works. So he's got tags, state, strings, and so on, things moving through it, which is good.
Yeah, and I can also see there are quite a lot of comments about what's the difference between a unit test and integration test and stuff like that. And as I was saying, strictly, if you go by the book, a unit test is testing one method in one class, and that is one unit test. And you should, of course, make sure that you're testing your one method in that one class as verbose as possible. So you're going through the entire range of integers, or you're making sure that you're going around the corner cases and all that stuff. And that is by the book. That is strictly by the book. But I really have the notion that I think that some people live by writing books and other people live by writing software. And you have to combine those things, because it's hard, if not impossible, to make a complete project with, let's say, 3 million lines of code with 100% code coverage on strictly the unit testing way. That is going to be very hard. I would not ever try even to accomplish that. Never. I would add in integration tests into my frameworks. I would add whatever and Ranorex and whatever. So yeah, as I said, it's some people live on writing books, other people live on writing software. So you have to see if you can find a golden middle way to get through it.
Yeah, so just on the questions here about the integration testing and so on, what the difference is. So one of the areas that I've used unit tests in the past, I did a project sample looking at, it was using DataSnap at the time. So we had business logic on the server side that were testing the objects to make sure that they were working. And then we also had additional tests that checked the persistence and retrieval of those objects. So we'd populate an object, save it to the database, destroy the object, and load it back up from the database, and to make sure that those save and load patterns were working correctly, to make sure everything was comparable afterwards. And the other part of the integration testing that we did then, which again was really, really easy to do with DUnit, and we can then test it, was to actually use some of the client code to fetch those objects and post them back remotely. So we're doing both the server side and the remote testing of those. And that was very useful. And actually, when we changed things later on, we were able to identify if updates, when we're adding additional values back in or into the objects being passed around, if it was breaking any of the transportation code that had been put together. So that way, you're testing both your server and what you're doing with it, but also then what your end user is going to be using and consuming, which is especially important if you have an API that you're exposing, to make sure that that's not breaking. And although it's not a unit within your code, it's still a gateway into your code. That's hopefully that kind of gives a good clarification between the two for the questions that were coming through.
I've also seen a very nice approach with, now that you said about databases, that you load stuff into the database and then load it back out again. That a company I was working for, they wrote some tests where they knew if I insert these and these records into the database, then I should have this and this in the database structure when I'm done. So they actually made some Excel file sheets with the expected results, and then they loaded stuff into their database with the components or the objects that they have built for that, and then dumped the whole thing into Excel, and then made it a very normal, just compare those two files to see if they were the same by using I forgot the name. There's this really nice comparison tool written in Delphi, of course. It's let me have a look. I have to have it some.
Was it?
Sorry?
Was it Go Compare?
No, it's I'm gonna remember.
Beyond Compare.
Beyond Compare.
Yeah.
Beyond Compare. Yeah. Thomas.
Go Compare. An insurance company.
Beyond Compare is really great because some of the when you dump files from a database, you're going to have to mess with maybe auto-incremented primary keys and stuff like that. But in the Beyond Compare, you can set up which columns to actually ignore and stuff. So it's really a very nice comparison tool.
Yeah, so I've got an offer for a contribution here from Alan. So Alan, you're saying, do you want to share your experience of dealing with 500k lines worth of code?
Sure. We ended up using Delphi by accident in that we had a database, and the only way we were told we could actually talk to that database was using a driver that only worked with Delphi. So we picked up Delphi and started writing that. We ended up writing about 500,000 lines at the time in order to support a database application. We then discovered unit testing, and what we found was actually retrofitting unit tests to 500,000 lines for two of us was going to take a while. And what we ended up doing was we just ended up doing things like making forms pop up, which meant they exercised the majority of what they did and went away again. And actually, in terms of glitches and bugs that the customer experienced, that actually found quite a lot of them because they were the showstoppers. Things would just die. The downside of that approach is we're testing at a level whereby we end up processing large quantities of data, bringing large quantities of data back, processing it and doing whatever, and the tests are just really slow. Well-written unit tests, if you do it properly, you can do quite exhaustive testing, but because you're only testing very small things at a time, you should actually achieve really good coverage for very limited runtimes, which for us with 400,000 lines is an issue.
That's true, yeah. But as you said, Alan, it does actually take time to add in unit tests to a 500,000 line of code project. It's going to be so boring that you're going to run screaming away. So I would not recommend doing that. So, but kudos on you for actually having added some tests to it. That's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of comes back to the other thing I was saying earlier about the actual complementing and not thinking that testing your code is all about just unit tests. There are other approaches, and getting the users to build the tests is a great way of doing that, by getting them to interact with the UI using something like Ranorex, where they can actually, you can build kind of basic script test, for logic for kind of logging into the application. So getting all the boring stuff that you have to do time and time again, you can record a script for that. And then, it works very, very well for Windows VCL applications, because even if controls move around on the screen, it's using the Windows handle to actually, register in and read the control and work out what's going in it and out of it and checking that. So, that's a great way to be able to kind of build up a test coverage on an application without doing unit testing, but still get some of the benefits through, and still have an automated way to run it. Because I think that's one of the key things here is the automation, and being able to automate those tests is a great way to do it. And talking about automation, obviously there are Ide Add-Ins that you can add in to the IDE that help in terms of the name's just kind of slipping my mind for the plugin.
Test Insight?
Test Insight, there we are. That's a fantastic one, because once you've got your tests written, if you're working on an area of code, you can have it docked and you'll see them constantly just running in the background. So as you finish typing your bits, you'll see kind of the green check marks coming up as you go, which is great, and kind of pointing you in the right direction. So those kind of things are invaluable to have in your code.
Yeah, when you have the Delphi installation, then you have an option when you install it to add two different frameworks. There's DUnit and there's DUnitX framework, and it boils down for me to a matter of preference, which one that you like more over the other. I discovered the other day that for some reason that the DUnit framework has been marked as deprecated on the wiki on Embarcadero's site. I don't know why, because I find it to be a really, really nice and well-working framework. DUnitX is a newer framework than DUnit, so I'm guessing, but this is a guess of mine, so this is my idea only, that someone thought that DUnitX is better than DUnit, so let's deprecate DUnit. I don't know if that's the case, but that's my guess. But both of the frameworks are still in the box. So if you want them installed, you just have to go into the platform manager and check the box, install DUnit frameworks. That will install DUnit and DUnitX frameworks. The differences between the two are minimal. One of the major things that I like about the DUnitX framework is that the unit tests that you write can take parameters. So you can use these parameters to pass into your code that you're testing. So for example, if you have an add thing they want to test, you can add 5 and 7, but you can also add 5 and 5. So you can take in the parameters into the tests. And DUnit does not support that. But on the other hand, DUnit does support scanning through your existing classes and then creating test stubs for all of them. So that saves you a bit of time. And I mentioned, I noticed that someone in the chat mentioned something about you can use Spring4D, because Spring4D actually adds some capabilities to both DUnit and DUnitX. And one of the capabilities it adds is actually parameterized tests. So, and it does that for both DUnit and the already existing DUnitX. So, so there's the notion of having parameters on your tests is perfectly good, even on DUnit, if you also have the Spring4D framework installed on your IDE. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So just having a quick look at the other questions and comments coming into the chat. Glenn's mentioning one of the areas I think we're going to be touching on to in a moment, but I think it's a good time to move on to it now, is just how unit tests benefit you in time, and what kind of the benefits around unit testing. So we've spoken a little bit about being able to basically find bugs a lot quicker, also to regression test as you're going, to immediately get that feedback if you're using Test Insight in the IDE, that what you've changed and coded hasn't broken anything. But also as part of the whole kind of DevOps approach, and if you are using continuous integration, continuous build servers, as you're checking your code in, you can have the unit tests run in the background, and then you can see the results of those unit tests. So if you've got a big suite of unit tests to run, it's a great way of getting that immediate feedback of, everything's working or no, it's not working, which helps with kind of the merging of code.
Will actually reject it if it doesn't pass every single test.
Yeah.
So you won't be allowed to check it in. About this time, I've had the test-driven development course a couple of times now, 5 times I think, or something like that, and it's always up for a discussion. Let me say it that way. But does this cost time or does it save time? And the first time that you are going to write a unit test, it of course costs time, because you have to learn how to write a unit test. And you're going to have to also probably learn how to think how to write my code, my production code, so that it is actually testable. And that's a new experience for a lot of people, because you write code and it works. And you compile it, it works. You ship it to the customer, it works. And it works fine for many years without any problems, whatever. And then someone comes and say, but you did it wrong. But that's the thing, you don't necessarily have done it. You haven't necessarily done it wrong, but you've not done it testable. So that was what I was saying when I started programming. I would take my Delphi, I would fire up a new project, I would add some buttons and some edit boxes, and I would happily fire away on the button 1 click. I would do the if edit1.text equals so and so, I would do so and so, and everything would be muddled up in unit 1, and I probably wouldn't even rename unit 1 to anything. I would just have unit 1 in project 1 with button 1, button 2, button 3, and edit 1, and it works. There's no problem in that, but it's not testable, and it's hard, really hard to test. So yes, it does take time to learn about unit testing, just as it takes time to learn about programming. So the first time I was traversing through a database structure, that took me a long time also, because I didn't know how to do it. So I had to look up in books, and this was of course before there was any internet really to help me. So I had to look up in books, how do I traverse a table in a database and all that stuff. So it takes time, you learn it, and then you get quicker at it, and then you get more and more efficient, and then you would on your own be able to write your code so it's testable without having actually to think hard about writing it so it's testable. Just like when I was learning how to create a database, I had to learn to make it into a very nice structured database without any redundancy and all that. And it took time the first times, but now I more or less have it in my head. Oh, I have to have a foreign key to point to the master table or something like that. So yeah.
Okay, sorry, carry on.
Okay, and then when you have learned how to write unit tests, make sure that you run them all the time, because then you would immediately discover any bugs that you introduce into the system. And I mean, we've all been there. I have for sure. You fix some bug that you get into the system, and the bug is somewhere in the east of the project, and then something in the west or the north or the south just tumbles over and doesn't work anymore. Having unit tests added or integration tests added also into all of that system, make sure that, or at least helps you to find the bugs before you ship them to the customer. And it's after shipping to the customer they become expensive.
Yeah, I think also one of the kind of side effects of thinking about unit testing, and even if you don't reach the entire way there, but one of the side effects of thinking about it is that you start coding in a way that is aware of the other things around it. So, Daniela yesterday talking about these open source projects, and one of the key things was isolation of code blocks and making sure things were easy to put together, but also didn't have wide-ranging impact. And by making everything testable, you kind of start getting that side effect that things become a little bit more decoupled. Things are, a building block is a building block that does a specific task, and you're able to then find and be aware of where issues are going to be quicker because of the way code is written. I think, certainly the one thing just on the time factor, it's often kind of a year later you find the payback, because quite often on a project that you kind of work on for a bit and then you need to come back and do some other stuff, customer requirements are changing or modifying and they need additional things added in. You don't remember everything that you're doing. I can't remember half of what I was doing last week, let alone a year ago. And that's the kind of thing that having those unit tests then become your kind of sanity check, to make sure that you haven't done anything stupid that you wouldn't have thought about. Because quite often when you're coding in the moment of something and it's all fresh, it's very easy to think it would be a lot quicker to do this without unit tests. But that's kind of almost like a false horizon to look at, because actually you need to look at the long-term code investment and code debt that you're putting in place.
I remember when I was at school learning to code, and the teacher told me you have to write code so that someone else can read it in 3 months' time, and you have to write comments so that they can not even only read the code, but they have also the possibility to understand what the code is supposed to do. I've actually figured that stuff everyone else, I have to read the code in 3 months, and that's the problem. I have to understand my own code in 3 months, and that can be very hard. So yes, for all means, do write unit tests and also comments on the code so that make it cleaner. Alexander also noticed here that yes, it can act as a form of documentation, because if you have written a well written suite of tests for your code, then you can more or less read the test and you'll understand what the code is supposed to do.
Yeah. A few comments about light and close coupling, loose and tight coupling, sorry, of code. Let's have a quick look. There's a couple of comments about ways people are doing things. Jason saying he's written a macro book into his system so they can paste into the locate. Oh, it's just disappeared. Paste in and doing some testing around forms and frames, so they can identify glitches faster. That's pretty cool. Marco's on. He's just mentioned that actually, the D unit is actually used an awful lot internally on a lot of other projects, and it also supports C++. So
he's going to fix the doc wiki page, so it's no longer being decremented.
So yeah, it's not going away anytime soon. We'll get the doc wiki page fixed.
Thanks, Marco.
yeah, Kevin Bond is saying Delphi Object Pascal code. It's his favorite because it's pretty self-documenting. It's because it's a very easy language to read, which
It is a very easy language to read. I will give you that.
Mm.
And if you make sure that your method names and your class names are good and readable, then yeah. I mentioned something about adding comments to your code. I've also seen adding too much comments to the code. By the way, this has nothing to do with testing really, but it's still about readability of code. I saw someone create a method called login, taking a username and a password, and then it wrote a comment, "This is to log into the system." And I, well, yeah, it is probably. That would be a bit too much, I would think.
Yeah, and funny, going back to Tuesday session, the Open Tools API, we had some talk about some of the ability to add documentation into your code with parameters and anything else like that. And they're fantastic, especially with the Code Insight, being able to pull up those parameters as you're going through. That can certainly help with the coding to make it a lot easier to use the functions you are writing and to have awareness of what the code is for as you kind of go through. So that is definitely a practice that I would recommend having a look into. Phil here is commenting about he uses dunit-x over dunit because it can be integrated into the CI build process because of the outputs that are required. So being able to run the XML test out makes it a lot easier.
You can also, as he also says, use the unit, but you have to add something else then. So learn how to do it. Unit-x doesn't have a box. Yes, and Hilya, you're right. When you've added some comments to your code and then you change the code and you don't change your comments are going to cause confusion. That's so true. Okay,
so it's been a really interesting talking bit through so far. Having a quick look at the screen there, I think we've covered most of the bases in terms of the key comments and questions that we were going to try and cover through today. If there's anything else that anybody would like to kind of raise right now, if I've missed it down.
Does anyone not know how to use unit testing? How to start it? Because if someone here doesn't know how actually to start it, I would happily show how to
okay, do you want to tease us with a quick demo of some unit testing? As I'll say, beyond the quick part here, I'll just make you the presenter, Jens. Beyond kind of a quick demo of unit testing before we close out, there are some brilliant sessions on the Embarcadero YouTube channel that Jens and others have done in the past, looking at test-driven development. There's also some great sessions on dependency injection and how to kind of limit those in your code, which is a great step towards helping make code more testable. Nick Hodges has run some of those. So some really, really good kind of follow-up stuff on the YouTube channel. And also on the Embarcadero blog. The Embarcadero blogs have had a big facelift in the last few months. There's a huge amount of stuff running through those now. So definitely check out blogs.embarcadero.com if you are not on there already. So are you sharing your screen?
I am going to, yes. So if I've done it right, you should be able to see.
I can see that now, yeah.
All right, so just to show you how to get started with unit testing, whether you use one framework or the other. I'm just going to quickly create a demo project here, and I will just make it a VCL application. Now I'm actually going it the opposite way that you're supposed to, and I know that my Delphi for some reason wants to be on my other monitor, so I'm going to have to drag it back once in a while. That's fine. So this is my project one, and I'm just going to save that. I want to put it here. So I got unit one, which is a perfectly good name for a unit, and project one is a perfectly good name for a project. So there we go. Now I'm going to add a calculator class. I'm just going to make it real quick, just so you can get the idea what's supposed to happen here. So I'm going to go File, New, Delphi unit, and this is of course a not a unit in the unit testing sense, but this is a unit for whatever you're going to do. Right, and I'm really quickly typing here. So that's me typed in a calculator where I have added an add method that takes two integers, I and j, and I had a PhD on mathematics telling me this is actually how you add two integers. I'm not going to discuss with a PhD on mathematics, so if he says this is the way, this is the way. So I'm going to copy that name and save a unit this here. So now I have a project where I have a uCalculator unit, and inside of the uCalculator unit I have a TCoffeeAndCode class that has a method that can add something. I'm not going to run the project because that doesn't really make sense, but I'm going to create a new, what I will do here is File, New, Other, and in the box that goes on my other screen, I would go into Other, Unit Test, and add a test project. And I'm just going to, it has found out now because I'm adding it to an existing project. Oh, there's a project called Project 1, and it's located here and here and here. So I'm just going to go next and go finish. Now I've added the project for this, but the project does not contain any tests as such. So I need to go to File, New, Other, and in the Other box, Unit Test, I want a test case. So this is going to go through my, this is what I said, it's going to scan through the classes that I have. So it's going to scan through this class. Sometimes it guesses wrong and it will go for unit 1 instead. And then here I have a form, which I don't want to add any unit tests to. So just so you're aware that you're going through the correct one here. So go next and finish. And this actually just created some empty tests here for me. I have somewhere, as you may notice, I have some cheat code here, but that's fine because I've already created some of this. So I'm just going to paste that over there and then Control-Shift-C. And now I should have my test project going here. And what I can do is I can run the test project. And I can run it, and now I can see I get a green mark on my add method. So my add method actually works. It did actually take these two integers, I5, J7, add them together and got 12 back. So that's perfectly fine. For some reason, this went in the private one. There we go. Okay, so now I should have two tests in here. So both of my tests work. So now it comes the time where I can go and refactor the code because I figured out that this might be a bit complex for adding two integers. And someone tells me, oh, the last line here is wrong. That should just be removed. So I'm going to remove that last line. And then I'm going to, as soon as I finish saving off all these files here, then I'm going to run my test again. Now I've refactored my complex adding to something, and it figures out that, oh, something went wrong here. Oh, okay, because I did it wrong. I messed it up. So I can go back here and I can now refactor this code again to something that should be a tad simpler. And it turns out that I actually don't need these temporary variables. So I can remove all of that stuff. And now run my test again. And now I should have confidence that I have taken some complex code and made it simpler and I'm sure that it still works as it's supposed to work. I hope that makes sense to everyone. I can't see any of you at the moment, but I'm going to hand the presenting stuff back to Stephen if I can.
Yeah, no, we're all still here, Jens. That's all cool.
So that's just the quick version of how to get started with. In this case, it was DUnit. Doing the DUnit X is more or less the same.
Okay, so I know it's a real quick abridged version. There's a 2-day training course that Jens is taking right from the beginnings all the way through, covering those bits which he's running. I think it's next week, as he mentioned at the top with AlphaSoft. So if you're interested in that, then there is a link on the Embarcadero events page directly to that training. Yeah, I say I've seen some of his training materials and bits in the past, and the feedback from the sessions seems to be really, really good. There's a number of people who I know have been raving about the sessions when I've been over and visited the Nordics in the past. So the ability to kind of hook on and do that online is obviously quite an interesting option at the moment. So you know, a good side of having to work from home with everybody working from home is everything's having to adjust a little bit rather than being a live classroom based session.
Yeah, the training normally is a live classroom based session where I'm in a room and there are 8 to 12 students or something in the room, and we're doing the sessions, and it's a different experience doing it online. I cannot walk around watching your screens and your monitors, and it turns out that the discussions between students are non-existing when it's online, which is kind of a shame because it actually does help with the dynamics and the flows of any training course. And I do see a couple of faces here that I actually have had on my training courses. So since they're here now, I'm assuming that they're either going to throw rotten tomatoes at me, or it was because they had a nice time.
Okay, so just
there's a quick question about mocking that I want to address here.
Okay, sure.
And there are some different various mocking frameworks in the Delphi IDE that you can download and install. In Spring4D, that's the mocking framework that I have been using for the training courses that I have. I would use the Spring4D mocking. So it's a tmock record of generic type. So it's a tmock of T where you can set mocks up to be either working as functions or as procedures. And sometimes it can be a bit dodgy working with mocking frameworks, but it's also perfectly all right to just write small stub mocks yourself. You don't have to use a mocking framework. If you find it easier to just write an empty class, or if you have I know for a fact that in my course next week, I have a test on a score verifier. Now, I did mention something about archery, so I have a class that can verify a score in an archery competition, but the score verifier class takes in a logger, and the logger is supposed to log whatever the score was. But I'm mocking that out by just making an empty logger. I just made a class copy of the logger class and then just made it empty, so nothing happens in it. So there are a couple of ways to do mocking. Oh, Alf said it was a really nice time to visit Gothenburg for the TDD course. So he has been on my TDD course. So thank you very much, Alf.
Okay, I'm just having a quick look to see if there's any other questions.
Who tests the tester? Yes, that's an issue that you need to actually address when you are writing tests, because writing tests is actually writing code. So you can make the tests wrong, and if your tests are wrong, your code might pass, but it'd be a false positive.
Yeah, the chat has been very, very busy today. So sorry if I've not been able to kind of get through all of the bits in there. We are just kind of almost at the top of the hour low. So let's just as the final kind of parts are finishing through on the chat. One thing I will say that one of the add-ons that Danielle Tetti we covered yesterday a little bit with the Columbus egg. That's a very good open source project which you can use to help separate out some of the business logic from the database approach with the components on within kind of Delphi and C++ Builder. So that can help give that separation in a way. And just going back to one of the comments earlier about model view model. One of the things that actually is very useful for that design pattern is live bindings and being able to use the visual live bindings to connect the elements to the screen. That is certainly something that I would definitely say is worth having a look at and looking into if you haven't played with visual live bindings before and you are looking at using more of a model view model approach. That can be a very, very easy way to connect the UI to the to what you're doing, and also MVC, model view controller, to the actual control element. Just a last couple of bits to share with you as we're kind of finishing through. We have a showcase challenge running at the moment, and there's not long left. We're literally last 10 days of that at the moment. So definitely worth getting any apps that you've got written that you want to submit into the showcase on. We've got a section on our blog section on our blogs that highlights the showcases now. So it's a really, really good place to be able to share what you've done with your application. On the link is links to built with Delphi logos and the likes that you can add onto your website, or built with C++ Builder or Rad Studio. It's pretty straightforward. All the terms and conditions are on the bit.ly there. It's case sensitive, capital T, capital C, and capital W for TCoffeeWin on the bit.ly link. And then just share on Twitter, with @Embarcadero and hashtag Delphi26, and your submission will then be shared around, and whoever's getting the most votes through and likes and retweets can be open to some pretty decent prizes. And I think there's even a prize for getting your submission in. So definitely worth having a look at. It's great to see such a range and depth of things. I've been lucky traveling the world in the time that I've spent with Embarcadero, listening to how people have got software running in black boxes on aeroplanes, to running kind of critical infrastructure around hospitals and stock exchanges, and all the range of different business and agricultural and weird and wonderful things. I think one of my favorite things is the automated cow milking machine that was written with C++ Builder, which was pretty cool, where they actually use cameras to locate the teats, and then they're taking samples of the milk to analyze at live time to make sure everything's clean and sorted. And so amazing things being done with the tools. But regardless, whatever you're doing, it's great to see those and share those around, and a great chance to kind of get some kudos in the community as well. So please go ahead and take part in that and share it wherever you can. The more people we have knowing about that, the better.
See, there's a question about how to use live bindings to connect to objects and classes.
Yeah.
And I know that it is quite easily possible, and the best way to go about it is to search for Malcolm Groves, because Australian Delphi tech guy has made some very nice demo projects on how to do exactly that.
Yeah, the other place to have a look is on my blog. There's quite a few articles on there about using live bindings, connecting up between different objects, and also being able to mix and match between objects and data sets, and having them kind of keep in sync, so which would be very useful for controller classes and so on. So yeah, some really, really powerful stuff within there. It's fantastic, and there's there's going to be more bits coming through around controls written that are going to enable kind of more things in the future, which is pretty cool. But my favorite thing about visual live bindings is that any object, also any control in the VCL, you can bind to. So even the non-data aware controls, you can make data aware using live bindings. So you can actually save a lot of time and effort, and just by right-clicking, viewing the object's designer and drawing a line between one and the other, or just adding into code on the form create the binding between the two parts that you want. So it is very, very flexible and powerful.
Jason Chapman is asking you, Stephen, to do a talk about live bindings.
That's me opening my mouth again. Love to, Jason, anytime. Okay, good. Tomorrow's session, we are going to be on Mind Your Language, which we're going to be having both David and Marco in, talking about some of the recent language changes and updates that have come into both Delphi and C++. So really looking forward to that session. And if there's any specific elements or any favorites that you want to share with us beforehand, please feel free to kind of drop me a message over, and we can see if we can get those included in, or just be ready with the live chat tomorrow, same time, same channel, and we look forward to seeing you back then for day 5. So thank you very much, Jens, for the time today, for joining us for the chat. Thank you to everybody online for the input, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers,
Thank
everyone.
you very much for having me here, and thanks to everyone for coping with me for an hour.
It's been dejligt. Så tak for nu.
Learning by suffering, I call it.
All right. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.